Well, out of all the people watching today, I think I can safely put us in two categories. You either lean towards learning by experience or you lean towards learning by being taught. Why don't you just tell the people in the room which one you are? For me, I'm a learn by experience kind of person. And while that's good when you're learning a skill, it's not good when you're navigating a lot of other things in life. You've heard that experience is the best teacher. And what that really means for some of us is that I did that once and I'm never going to do that again. My wife, she's a learn by being taught type of person. And I'll just say this, she has far less regret in her life than I do. And to those of you who learn like that as well, you probably avoided things the rest of us just had to go try out. Am I right? We're in this series called Encountering Jesus, where we're looking at different episodes in the ministry of Jesus as people encountered him. And today's story is about a group of people who are about to learn from an experience. It starts in the New Testament book of John, chapter 8, starting at verse 2. But before I go there, I want to set up the story. Jesus had been teaching all around Jerusalem, and he starts out the morning back in the temple courts. Now, up until this point, he taught about heaven. He taught about forgiveness. He had taught about miracles and performed miracles, but not everybody was getting it. Some people were afraid of him. The religious leaders were intimidated by him. And so in John chapter 8, beginning at verse 1, it says this: Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives, but early the next morning he was back again at the temple. A crowd soon gathered, and he sat down and taught them. He was speaking. The teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd. Teacher, they said to Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say? They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him. Now imagine this scene. Jesus is teaching, and he was interrupted with people who were looking for a way to trap him just to prove their point. And to do so, they likely set up this immoral woman with no regard for her, and it seemed like an open shut case. She was caught with a man she was not married to. She got caught, and she's guilty, and the law said people like that should be stoned to death. Why did they even have to ask Jesus since the law was so clear? See, they were referring to this ancient law that said to stone people caught in this act. And the reason this seems like a setup is because the law said to stone both the man and the woman, but they only bring her before Jesus. And so they asked him because they wanted to trap him. They didn't care about the law. They didn't care about this woman. She was simply a pawn to them. Because if Jesus says go ahead and stone her, they have him trapped because Jews were not allowed to conduct their own executions. They had to report their executions to Roman authorities. So if he says yes, they have him doing something illegal against Rome. And if he says no, don't stone her, then they would say, well, you're a fraud as a teacher because you're violating the law of Moses, which was the law that governed the Jews. It's a tense moment in front of a lot of people. They caused a disruption. And here's how Jesus handled it. In John 8, verse 6, but he stooped down and he wrote in the dust with his finger. Now, we don't know what he wrote. Maybe he's just doodling to give them some time to think. In this crowd, there's this woman who's guilty, there's her accusers, and there's all the people watching. Picture this woman in the middle of all of them. And they have stones in their hands, ready to start killing her. And they keep pushing Jesus for an answer. In the next verse, it says, they kept demanding an answer. So he stood up and said, all right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. Then he stooped down again and wrote in the dust. Now, I wonder what he wrote the second time, if anything. Maybe he's marking an X for the lightning bolt to come from God and hit his target. That's probably not what he was writing. But they're disregarding this woman and trying to keep Jesus in a trap. And now they're told, okay, you stone her, but those of you who have never sinned, you go first. And it probably got really quiet again. Like, anyone? Anyone? No one tossed a stone. In fact, they got out of there. And listen to what happened in John 8, beginning at verse 9. When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I." Jesus didn't condemn her. She was caught in the middle of sin, and he said, "I don't condemn you." Now that's called grace. She deserved to die according to the law, but he extended grace to her. She knew what she was doing was wrong, and she did it anyway. And here she is standing in front of Jesus, and she received something she did not deserve, a full pardon from her sins. And the last thing Jesus says to her is this, in the second part of verse 11. He says, "Go and sin no more." Hearing you're forgiven is easy. Hearing stop doing what you're doing because it's sinful is not as easy to hear. And here's something you may not know about Jesus. This is said about him in the first chapter of the same book where this story is found. Listen to this. In John chapter 1, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." She received both that day. Grace, I don't condemn you. Truth, go and sin no more. Stop living the life you're living. See, grace is easy to hear and accept. Stopping the things I do because I want to do them is not. This story tells me that when I'm caught in sin, when I'm doing things I know are wrong, grace is available to me. Jesus says, "I don't condemn you." But you know what else he offers? Go and leave your life of sin. We don't know what happened to her, but I bet she left that immoral lifestyle behind that she was living. Because when we truly understand the grace offered to us, the grace that we can receive, that leads to more obedience than any set of rules or laws ever could. See, this lady knew the rules. She knew sleeping with people she's not married to was a sin. It's highly unlikely she's standing there going, "What? What did I do?" She knew. And the great majority of the time, we know when we're moving away from God and his desire for us. Our human nature is to push the limits towards anything we feel like we should do, right? I mean, I grew up around my grandfather, and he would pull me aside occasionally, especially as I became a teenager, and he would say, "Boy, don't do," and he would go through a list of things I shouldn't do. And I remember thinking, well, I never thought of that one. That sounds like fun. And so I went out and I did some of them. The point is, knowing the rules doesn't give you a desire to obey them. But receiving grace gives me what I need to feel forgiven and leave behind the things that separate me from God. Here's the deal. You and I, we are not the standard for grace and truth. Only Jesus is. The grace and truth I give will never go as far as the grace and truth that Jesus gives. So what if I started pouring out the grace of Jesus on the relationships in my life? You have some conflict, somebody you're at odds with, try pouring a little grace of Jesus on that relationship and see what happens. Now you might think, well, Donnie, you don't understand the person I live with, or you don't know what I have to deal with on a daily basis. But try it. Try the grace of Jesus first, and it just may give you the opportunity to speak truth. Now, it's not going to work perfectly because we're human and we don't say things perfectly, but it's far better than any alternative. Remember this, give grace before speaking truth. Now, speaking truth is not always easy, but it's exactly what Jesus does to each of us. He says, I'll give you grace, but leave your life of sin behind. See, we're all the woman. We all do things we shouldn't. We all sin. And the same thing he offered her that day, he offers us, grace and truth. We're also the other people in this story, her accusers. See, they came accusing. They came thinking they were right. In fact, according to the written law, they were right. But just because something is legal, it doesn't make it right. But they didn't do it because they clearly determined in their hearts they were not at a place where they could condemn someone to death. Let me give you some insight as to how I write my messages. First, I look at the section of scripture or verses that I'm going to use and I say, God, how does this apply to me? And so then I read through it and I make notes in the margins about how I believe that particular passage applies to my life. And last week, as I read through this story, I get to the part of how it applies to me and I felt some conviction. Now, I don't live the life the woman lives, but when I look at the religious people and I think about what God is teaching me in this message, I wrote down in my Bible these words, where is my stone? Where is my stone? Is it in my hand, ready to accuse, ready to prove my point, ready to win my argument, or is it on the ground? Often, it's in my hand. See, when they left the stones on the ground, they were admitting defeat. And they were saying, Jesus, you win. You're right. Here's a question I ask each of you. Where is your stone? Where is it? Is it in your hand, ready to destroy someone with your words, with a few keystrokes that you hide behind and a few venom-filled words of disagreement? Ready to try to win your argument, to prove your point? Or is it on the ground saying, Jesus, you win. You're the one that's right. You're the source of grace and truth and deliverance, not me. Throwing down my stone and my argument and my biases and letting the grace and truth of Jesus guide my words and my heart is what he wants for me. And it's what he wants for you. If you're taking notes, write this down. Or just remember it this week as you're working through conflicts in your life. Is my stone in my hand or is it on the ground? If you want to see Jesus work in your life like never before, put it on the ground. What if we all searched our hearts? What if we all looked really hard in the mirror and thought about this story? See, there's three people or groups of people who are mentioned in this story. There's Jesus, and you can go ahead and repeat after me, I am not Jesus. There's the accusers, and some of you will find that when you look in the mirror. And then there's the woman in sin, and some of you will find that when you look in the mirror. And here's the good news. The grace and truth the accusers and the sinful woman heard that day, they are both available to you. Whether you're dropping your stone or you're admitting your sin, Jesus longs to cover you with his grace. But with his grace come the same words from him that they all heard that day. Stop sinning. This is great news that each of us can receive grace, the strength, the resolve to stop the things in my life that keep me far from God. You want to receive that grace today? If you never have, it's as simple as joining me in this prayer. If you're ready to receive his grace, just close your eyes and pray this prayer with me. Jesus, I need your grace. I need your truth. Search my heart and show me where I need to change, where I need to give and receive grace. I want to live for you and not for me. I want you to guide my life. I want to follow you. And it's in your name I pray. Amen. Now, if you prayed that prayer, there are other steps you need to take. And that's what we're here for. Some of you need to follow Christ in baptism, which is the first step when someone believes in Jesus. Some of you need to obey him and leave your old life behind and start over. Some of you need to talk, and that's what we're here for. If you're at one of our moderated services, just click on the live prayer tab. And if you're watching on demand, contact us in whatever format you're using and we'll be in touch. What would your life and relationships look like if they were covered in the grace and truth of Jesus daily? Let's all go live like that and watch what happens.